Lieutenant Alex Rivera had been briefed 3 separate times about the Sithari delegation before they ever arrived at Meridian Station. The first briefing covered basic diplomatic protocol, how to address royalty, proper distance maintenance, cultural sensitivities around hierarchy and status. The second briefing went deeper into Sithari psychology and social structures, explaining their complex caste system and the profound importance they placed on maintaining proper social boundaries. The third briefing was shorter and significantly more emphatic. "Do not speak to Princess Calenti," Commander Hayes said, making eye contact with each member of the security detail individually to ensure the message landed. "Do not address her unless she speaks to you first. Do not make direct eye contact for extended periods. Do not approach her. Do not acknowledge her beyond the minimum required for professional security duties. Am I being clear?" "Yes, ma'am," the detail responded in unison. "I'm serious about this," Hayes continued, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "The Sithari consider it profound disrespect, like genuinely offensive insult, for anyone of lower status to initiate contact with their royalty. Princess Calenti is third in line to their throne and one of their most important diplomatic representatives. Any breach of protocol with her could destroy these negotiations, and we need this peace treaty. Humanity needs this alliance. So I'm going to say it one more time. Do not speak to her first. Do not engage with her beyond your explicit security duties. Follow this order, or you'll be responsible for starting an interstellar incident. Understood?" "Understood, ma'am." Alex understood perfectly. He was a professional. He could follow orders. He'd been in military service for 6 years, worked security on multiple diplomatic missions, never caused an incident. He knew how to be invisible when necessary, how to maintain proper distance, how to be present without being intrusive. Then Princess Calenti arrived, and Alex understood why the warnings had been so emphatic and repeated. The Sithari were beautiful in that otherworldly way that made humans uncomfortable. They hit the uncanny valley from the other direction, too perfect and elegant for human aesthetic comfort. They were universally tall and slender, with skin that shifted through subtle opalescent colors like oil on water, hair that moved with liquid grace as though underwater even in normal atmosphere, and an air of refined perfection that made humans feel crude by comparison. Princess Calenti made the other Sithari look ordinary. She was taller than most of her species, close to 7 feet in the low heels that were apparently part of formal Sithari attire, with skin that didn't just shift through subtle colors, but moved through them like watching mercury flow, silver to pale blue to hints of lavender in constant, elegant transition. Her hair was long, falling past her waist, and it was the color of starlight, silver-white with undertones that seemed to shift through rainbow spectrum depending on the angle of light. And her eyes were the deep purple of distant nebulae, large and luminous, and currently scanning the assembled human delegation with an expression that managed to be both regal and profoundly distant. She was surrounded by attendants who maintained rigid formation around her, never speaking unless spoken to, treating her like a living religious icon rather than a person. When she moved, they moved with her in synchronized precision. When she stopped, they stopped. When she gestured, they responded as though her smallest movement carried profound meaning. Alex was assigned to corridor security outside the diplomatic quarters where the Sithari delegation would be staying. His job was straightforward: stand watch, look professional, prevent unauthorized access, respond to security concerns. He wasn't supposed to interact with the delegation beyond polite acknowledgement if they passed his position. Simple enough. Except Princess Calenti walked past his post 3 times in the first 4 hours, significantly more than seemed necessary for someone who was supposedly resting in diplomatic quarters after a long journey. The first time, she glided past with her full entourage, and Alex maintained proper position, eyes forward, posture professional, acknowledging her presence with the kind of awareness required for security but not engaging beyond that minimum standard. As she passed, she glanced at him. Brief, quick, her nebula-purple eyes meeting his for maybe half a second before looking away. Her attendants didn't seem to notice, but Alex definitely did. The second time, an hour later, her entourage was smaller, only 2 attendants instead of the full 6. She walked more slowly, and when she passed Alex's position, she looked at him again. This time for maybe a full second, her expression unreadable but her gaze definitely deliberate. Alex kept his eyes mostly forward, giving her the professional acknowledgement required for security awareness, but not making extended eye contact that might violate the protocols he'd been so emphatically warned about. The third time, another hour after that, she was alone except for one attendant who was trailing several steps behind her. Princess Calenti slowed her pace as she approached Alex's position, and this time when she looked at him, it was unmistakable. She was studying him deliberately, her nebula eyes taking in his face, his posture, his presence with focused attention. Alex maintained his professional stance, eyes forward, not acknowledging her scrutiny beyond the security awareness he'd maintained for any delegation member walking past his position. But his heart rate definitely increased, and he was acutely aware of her presence, her attention, the way her opalescent skin was currently shifting through what might have been curious colors, soft silvers and pale golds. Then she was past, continuing down the corridor with her attendant, and Alex was left wondering what the hell that was about. That evening, he was reassigned to the observation lounge, one of Meridian Station's premium spaces with full transparent hull sections offering unobstructed views of the stars. The Sithari delegation had been given exclusive access for the evening, and Alex's job was to maintain security at the entrance while they used the space for whatever private gathering they wanted. The delegation filtered in with typical Sithari precision, attendants first, establishing positions, then secondary diplomatic staff, then higher-ranking officials. Princess Calenti entered last, moving with that impossible fluid grace, and was guided to a central seat where she arranged herself with perfect composure while her entourage arrayed themselves around her in what was clearly hierarchical order. Alex stood at attention by the entrance, trying not to notice how the princess looked profoundly alone despite being surrounded by at least 20 of her people. There was something about her posture, the way she sat with perfect regal bearing while staring out at the stars, that suggested isolation rather than companionship. After about an hour, attendants began leaving in small groups. Apparently there was some formal dinner happening that the princess was excused from. Her position was too elevated to participate in such common diplomatic functions, or something like that. Alex didn't fully understand Sithari social hierarchies, but he understood that slowly, methodically, the observation lounge was emptying. 20 minutes later, it was down to the princess, 3 attendants and Alex at his post. 10 minutes after that, the last attendants departed with formal bows, leaving Princess Calenti sitting alone in the center of the observation lounge, still in that perfect regal posture, still staring at the stars. And Alex, still standing guard at the entrance to a room that now contained only one person who probably didn't need active security presence. He should probably call this in, request reassignment, or at least confirmation that his post was still necessary. Guarding an empty observation lounge felt like resource waste, even if technically the princess was still present, and thus the room wasn't completely unoccupied. He was reaching for his comm to check with command when Princess Calenti stood with fluid grace that made the movement look choreographed, and walked directly toward him. Not toward the door, toward him specifically, her nebula-purple eyes fixed on his face with that same deliberate attention from earlier. Alex's training kicked in automatically. Maintain position, professional awareness. Don't engage beyond security necessity. But his heart rate spiked as she approached, because she was definitely approaching him rather than just passing by, and he had no idea what protocol dictated for this situation. She stopped approximately 3 feet away from his position, close enough to be clearly intentional, far enough to not be overtly inappropriate. Her skin was shifting through colors rapidly, silvers and golds and hints of something almost pink, emotional state made visible in ways that felt intensely private. Princess Kalenti studied him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly in what might have been curiosity or assessment or both. Then she did something Alex never could have predicted. She sat down on the floor, right there in the observation lounge. A princess of the Sithari Empire in her elaborate ceremonial robes, lowering herself to sit on the station floor 3 feet from a human security guard. Alex's brain completely short-circuited trying to process this. She hadn't spoken to him. Technically, he wasn't violating the explicit order not to speak to her first. But she was clearly doing something profoundly significant, and he had absolutely no framework for what response was appropriate. Princess Kalenti arranged her robes with meticulous care, maintaining that perfect posture even while seated on the floor, and then looked up at him with an expression that carried weight beyond his ability to interpret. She patted the floor beside her. The gesture was universal, sit with me, even across species barriers. Every bit of Alex's training screamed that this was inappropriate, potentially dangerous, definitely against the protocols he'd been so emphatically ordered to follow. He should maintain his post, should keep professional distance, should absolutely not sit on the floor with an alien princess he'd been explicitly forbidden from engaging with. But there was something in her eyes, a loneliness that transcended species and protocol, a desperate kind of reaching out that made his decision bypass all rational considerations. Alex sat down beside her, maintaining that same careful 3-foot distance, not speaking, and waited to see what would happen. Princess Kalenti didn't speak either. She just turned her attention back to the stars beyond the transparent hull, and they sat together in silence. Minutes stretched, 5, 10, 15. Neither of them spoke. Neither moved closer or further away. They just existed together in shared space, watching stars drift past, and somehow the silence felt profound rather than awkward. Alex became aware of small details. The way her skin's color shift slowed and stabilized into warmer tones, golds and soft ambers, that seemed to indicate contentment or peace. The way her breathing, initially quick and shallow, gradually deepened into something more relaxed. The way her perfect regal posture softened fractionally, like she was letting down defenses she maintained constantly around everyone else. He understood without words being spoken that this was significant, that she was sharing something with him that her position typically prevented, genuine authentic presence without the performance of royalty. After maybe 20 minutes, she turned to look at him again. Her nebula purple eyes met his, and there was something vulnerable in that gaze, something that asked without words if this was acceptable, if he understood what she was offering, if he was willing to accept it. Alex nodded slightly, the smallest acknowledgement. Yes, I understand. Yes, this is acceptable. Yes, I'm here. Her skin flushed with brilliant warm colors, golds and ambers and hints of what might have been pink, and something in her expression softened into what looked remarkably like relief. They sat together until her attendants eventually came looking for her, clearly alarmed to find their princess sitting on the floor with a human guard, but uncertain how to address it without causing offense to either party. Princess Kalenti rose with that fluid grace, arranged her robes with perfect precision, and left without speaking a word to anyone. But she glanced back at Alex once before leaving, and her eyes said thank you more clearly than words ever could have. Alex returned to his quarters after shift, lay on his bunk, and tried to process what had just happened. A Sithari princess, forbidden from his contact, elevated so far above his social status that speaking to her was considered profound insult, had deliberately sought him out and sat with him in loaded silence that felt more intimate than most conversations he'd ever had. He had no idea what it meant, had no idea if it would happen again, Had no idea if he just made a massive professional mistake that would destroy his career and possibly spark the diplomatic incident everyone was so worried about avoiding. What he did know was that for those 20-plus minutes sitting in silence beside Princess Kalenti, he'd felt more seen and present than he'd felt in years. And judging by the colors her skin had shifted through, she'd felt something similar. Tomorrow he'd worry about protocols and consequences. Tonight he'd just accept that sometimes connection transcends rules, and sometimes silence speaks louder than any words. Over the next week, it became a pattern neither of them acknowledged but both clearly maintained. Princess Kalenti would find herself near wherever Alex happened to be assigned for security duty. She never spoke to him, maintaining the technical letter of the protocol that said she must initiate any conversation. But she would sit near him whenever circumstances allowed, always at that same careful distance that was close enough to be deliberately seeking his presence but not quite close enough to be overtly inappropriate. Her attendants noticed. How could they not? Their princess was behaving unusually, seeking out proximity to a human guard, sitting in silence for extended periods when she should be engaged in diplomatic activities or rest. But she wasn't technically violating protocol. She wasn't speaking to someone beneath her status, wasn't engaging in conversation that would break the rules. So they watched with confusion and concern, but didn't intervene, uncertain how to address behavior that was strange without being explicitly forbidden. Alex's fellow security officers definitely noticed, and gave him looks that ranged from envious to concerned to frankly amused. But nobody reported it because the princess wasn't breaking explicit rules, and nobody wanted to be responsible for creating a diplomatic incident over what might just be eccentric royal behavior. Rodriguez, who worked security rotation with Alex, cornered him after a shift where Princess Kalenti had spent 90 minutes sitting in the corridor outside her diplomatic quarters, specifically in a section where Alex was maintaining patrol. "Dude, the alien princess is definitely into you," Rodriguez said without preamble. "She's not into me, she just sits near me sometimes. We don't even talk." "Yeah, that's what makes it so obvious. She's going out of her way to be near you, sitting in silence that is clearly loaded with meaning, and you're both pretending this is normal behavior. It's the most obvious mutual attraction I've ever seen, and it's happening entirely without words." "I can't talk to her," Alex said. "Orders are explicit. I don't initiate conversation with her under any circumstances." "Right, but she could talk to you. The protocol says you can't speak first, but she's allowed to initiate. The fact that she's not talking is a choice, man. She's choosing silence that says more than words would." "What's she saying then?" Rodriguez gave him a look. "She's saying she wants to be near you, but doesn't know how to bridge the gap between royalty and guard. She's saying she's lonely, and you're the first person who hasn't treated her like a religious icon. She's saying she's interested but trapped by her position. All of that, communicated entirely through choosing to sit in your presence instead of literally anywhere else she could be on this station." Alex knew Rodriguez was probably right, but acknowledging it made everything more complicated. "Even if that's true, what am I supposed to do about it? She's Sithari royalty. I'm human security. There's a massive gulf between us that isn't bridgeable by wanting." "Maybe not, but you could at least acknowledge what's happening instead of pretending loaded silence is normal professional behavior." Alex learned to read Princess Kalenti's moods through that silence. Her skin colors became a language he slowly decoded. Cooler tones like blues and silvers meant sadness or loneliness. Warmer tones like golds and ambers meant contentment or pleasure. Rapid flickering through multiple colors meant frustration or internal conflict. He started to understand what she wasn't saying through these silent observations. She was profoundly lonely despite being constantly surrounded by attendants and diplomats. Her people treated her like a sacred object, precious and important but not quite a person with normal emotional needs. Her position isolated her, made genuine connection impossible within her own culture. The diplomatic work she was engaged in was critical but also exhausting, high-stakes negotiations that allowed zero space for authentic self-expression. And somehow Alex, who was forbidden from speaking to her, who maintained careful professional distance, who couldn't engage with her in any conventional way, had become a source of genuine connection. His silence felt like acceptance. His presence felt like being seen without judgment. His willingness to just exist beside her without demanding performance or deference felt like freedom from the constant weight of her position. They developed a whole unspoken language. She would sit beside him, and he would shift his posture fractionally to acknowledge her presence without looking directly at her. She would arrange her robes in certain ways. Loose and relaxed meant silence. For the woman trapped behind royal protocols who'd found some kind of freedom in his presence. For someone he couldn't speak to, couldn't touch, couldn't acknowledge as anything beyond professional security awareness, but who he thought about constantly. This was impossible. She was Sithari royalty. He was human security. Even if their species weren't just barely establishing peaceful relations, even if her position didn't make any kind of personal relationship completely inappropriate, they were separated by every possible social and cultural barrier. But she kept sitting beside him, kept seeking his presence, kept building this connection through silence that felt more real than most conventional relationships he'd experienced. And Alex kept accepting it, kept meeting her in that silent space, kept falling for someone he'd never actually spoken to, but who he felt he knew better than people he'd known for years. Tomorrow he could worry about impossibility. Tonight he'd just accept that sometimes the most powerful connections form without words, and sometimes being seen is more important than being spoken to. The silence between them had become a language more eloquent than any conversation, and Alex was fluent in every word they'd never said. 2 weeks into their silent pattern, something changed. Princess Calenti arrived at the observation lounge where Alex was on evening duty, but instead of her usual composed entrance and graceful seating, she was agitated. Her skin was flickering rapidly through distressed colors, dark purples and sharp silvers, emotional turmoil made visible in ways that clearly indicated something was very wrong. She didn't even acknowledge Alex initially, just moved to the transparent hull section and stood staring out at the stars with her hands clasped tightly together, her perfect posture rigid with tension rather than regal bearing. Alex maintained his position at the entrance but watched her carefully, concern overriding protocol. He'd never seen her this distressed, and every instinct he had screamed that something significant had happened. After several minutes, Princess Calenti moved to sit in what had become their usual spot, that section of floor where they'd spent so many hours in loaded silence. But her movements were jerky instead of fluid, her composure fractured in ways he'd never witnessed. She sat and her hands were trembling, actually trembling, visible even from Alex's distance. He moved from his post without conscious decision, crossing the lounge to sit beside her at their established distance. Protocol could go to hell. She was clearly in distress, and leaving her alone felt wrong on every level that mattered more than regulations. As he settled beside her, Princess Calenti's trembling increased. Her skin was doing something he'd never seen, pulsing rapidly through colors in a way that looked almost painful, emotional overload made physically visible. Alex realized with shock that she was crying. Sithari apparently didn't produce tears the way humans did, but this was unmistakably the same emotional state. Her breathing was unsteady, her perfect composure completely shattered, colors pulsing with what could only be described as pain. He wanted to ask what was wrong, wanted to offer comfort, was trapped by the protocol that said he couldn't speak to her first, couldn't initiate contact, could only respond if she chose to engage. But sitting here watching her fall apart without trying to help felt unconscionable. "Your Highness," Alex said quietly, breaking weeks of silence, violating every order he'd been given. "What's wrong?" She turned to look at him, and the relief in her nebula-purple eyes was immediate and profound. "You spoke," she said, and her voice was melodious, even edged with distress, accented but clear. "You are not permitted to speak to me." "I know, but you're clearly upset, and sitting here in silence while your suffering seems worse than breaking protocol. What happened?" "The negotiations concluded today," Princess Calenti said, and her skin pulsed with those painful colors again. "Successfully, peace treaty signed, cultural exchange agreements established. Everything my delegation came here to accomplish, we accomplished it." "That sounds like good news." "It is good news for our peoples. It is disaster for me personally." She looked back at the stars, her trembling continuing. "I leave tomorrow, return to my homeworld, to my duties, to my life. This," she gestured between them with a hand that shook, "whatever this has been between us, it ends tomorrow." Alex felt something in his chest clench painfully. "I see." "Do you?" Her skin flashed with colors that might have been anger or frustration. "Do you truly understand? For 2 weeks, you have been the only person who treats me as though I am a being rather than a symbol. The only one who sits with me as an equal rather than worshiping from mandated distance. The only one whose presence feels like genuine connection rather than performed duty. And tomorrow, I lose this because the negotiations are complete and I am no longer needed here." "I'm sorry," Alex said, and the words felt completely inadequate. "I don't want you to go. I do not want to go." She shifted to face him more directly, and now they were definitely violating every protocol about proximity and appropriate interaction. "But I have responsibilities to my people. I am princess. I must serve my empire even when it costs me personally." "What does it cost you?" Alex asked, though he thought he knew. "It costs me you," Princess Calenti said simply, and her voice carried weight of absolute truth. "It costs me the only genuine connection I have formed in years. It costs me the human who looked at me and saw a person instead of a crown. It costs me the one who made silence feel like understanding instead of isolation. I will return to my world where everyone knows I am Princess Calenti, but no one knows who Kaelin actually is as a person. Except you. You know, and I will lose you tomorrow." "Then don't be silent tonight," Alex said, decision crystallizing even as uncertainty churned in his gut. "We have hours before you leave. If this is the only time we have, use it. Talk to me. Really talk, not through protocol and loaded silence. Tell me who Kaelin is when she's not being princess." Something in her expression shifted, surprise maybe, or hope. "You wish to hear me speak, after weeks of our silence." "I've valued the silence. It taught me to read you in ways I never could have through conversation. But if you're leaving tomorrow and will never have this chance again, I want to know you. Not just what your colors tell me or what your presence communicates. I want to hear your voice, your thoughts, your actual words, please." Princess Calenti, Kaelin, was quiet for a long moment, her skin cycling through complex colors that might have been processing or emotional conflict. Then she started talking. She told him about her homeworld, about cities that made human architecture look primitive, about crystalline structures that grew from the ground and shifted colors with the time of day, about growing up royal and isolated, about realizing as a child that she would never have genuine friends because everyone around her saw the crown before the person, about her siblings who accepted their positions with grace she'd never quite managed, about parents who loved her but couldn't really see her beyond her political value, about the loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people who treated her like she was sacred, about the exhaustion of maintaining perfect composure every moment because any emotional display was considered beneath royal dignity, about duties to her empire that she took seriously even when they were crushing, about negotiations that mattered for her people but left her feeling empty and used, about seeing Alex that first day and recognizing something in his expression, genuine acknowledgement without worship, professional respect without dehumanization, about how his refusal to initiate conversation had paradoxically made him the safest person to approach, because his silence meant She could control the interaction without fear of overstepping boundaries she didn't fully understand. About how sitting beside him had felt like the first genuine freedom she'd experienced in years. How his presence had become the one part of her day that felt real instead of performed. How she'd started looking forward to those silent sessions more than any diplomatic achievement or formal ceremony. Alex listened, and as she talked, he understood layers of loneliness and isolation he'd only glimpsed through their silent communication. She wasn't just a lonely princess. She was a person trapped inside an identity that denied her personhood, desperate for connection, but bound by protocols that made genuine connection almost impossible. I saw you and thought perhaps I had found someone who might see me as Kaelin rather than princess, she said, her colors warming to golds and ambers. And you did. You sat with me without expectations. You respected my silence while communicating acceptance through your presence. You became the one genuine thing in my life here. And now I lose you, and I return to isolation that will feel more crushing now that I know what connection feels like. I saw you too, Alex said quietly. I saw someone trapped by duty, isolated by position, desperate for genuine human or Sithari connection. I saw loneliness I recognized because I feel it too. Military service creates its own isolation. You're always professional, always maintaining distance, never quite letting anyone see the real you. And then you sat beside me, and somehow that silence felt like being seen for the first time in years. What happens tomorrow? Kaelin asked, and her voice carried desperation underneath the question. Tomorrow you leave. You return to your duties, your world, your isolation. And I stay here doing security work and trying not to think about the alien princess who sat beside me in silence and taught me that sometimes the most powerful connections don't need words. That is unacceptable outcome. Her skin flashed with those frustrated, rapid colors. I do not wish to simply leave and lose you to duty and distance. What alternative exists? Alex asked, though hope was building despite his efforts to suppress it. You're Sithari royalty with responsibilities. I'm human security with my own obligations. Even if our peoples are establishing peace, even if your position didn't make personal relationships completely inappropriate, we're separated by species and distance that can't be bridged just by wanting. But we do want, Kaelin said fiercely. That should matter. It matters to me, but I don't know if it matters enough to overcome everything that separates us. They talked through the night, Alex's shift forgotten, Kaelin's attendance presumably uncertain where their princess had gone but not interrupting. They talked about possibilities and impossibilities, about what they'd found in silence and what they were discovering in words. They acknowledged the connection between them that had formed despite every protocol designed to prevent it, acknowledged feelings neither had intended but both clearly possessed. As false dawn approached, station lighting shifting toward morning cycle, Kaelin said quietly, I wish I had words adequate to express what you have given me, Alex. What have I given you? He asked, and realized it was the first time she'd used his first name, probably learned from overheard conversations since he'd never introduced himself. Permission to exist as myself rather than as crown. Space to be lonely without pretense of regal perfection. Silence that felt like understanding rather than isolation. You gave me weeks of feeling genuinely seen, and that is gift beyond measure. You gave me the same, Alex admitted. You taught me that connection transcends words, that presence matters more than conversation, that being seen is more powerful than being spoken to. Kaelin. Just Kaelin when we are alone, she interrupted. Please. Let me be myself, rather than princess for these last hours we have. Kaelin, Alex said, and her skin flushed with warm, pleased colors. What do you actually want? If everything were possible, what would you choose? I would choose more time with you. I would choose to explore what we might become if we had opportunity beyond stolen silent hours. I would choose connection over duty, personal happiness over political obligation. She paused, her colors cycling uncertainly. But everything is not possible. Reality is that I leave tomorrow and we have no framework for maintaining connection across the distance between our worlds. Maybe we could find one, Alex said, and even as he spoke he knew he was being wildly optimistic, probably setting them both up for disappointment. I could request transfer. Cultural liaison positions exist between our peoples now. That's literally what the peace treaty established. I could apply for posting to Sithari space as part of the exchange program. Kalen's skin brightened with colors he'd learned meant hope or intense positive emotion. You would do this. Leave your post, your career path, your life here to come to my world where you would be outsider and minority. If it meant having time to figure out if what we have in silence could become something more with words and opportunity. Yeah, I'd do that. This is not logical decision, based on rational assessment of outcomes. No, it's emotional decision based on caring about you more than I care about logical career progression. Her skin flashed brilliant golds. I can request you specifically. As princess, I have influence in cultural exchange assignments. If you formally apply for liaison posting to Sithari space, I can ensure your application is approved. I can bring you to my world where we would have time, opportunity, fewer protocols restricting our interaction. You'd want that, having me on your homeworld. Alex, I would want anything that allows us to continue what we have begun. I would want to explore what exists between us when we are not bound by protocols forbidding speech. I would want to know you beyond silence and stolen hours. Yes, I want you there. Hope built in Alex's chest, fragile but real. Then I'll apply. Tomorrow after you leave, I'll submit transfer request for cultural liaison posting, and you'll make sure it gets approved. I will use every bit of influence I possess to ensure it, Kalen promised, and her colors were brilliant with determination and joy and something that might have been love. They sat together until her attendants found them, looking alarmed at discovering their princess with the human guard, but uncertain how to respond without causing offense. Kalen rose with that fluid grace, arranged her robes with perfect precision, and left without speaking, maintaining protocol even now. But she looked back at him once, and her eyes and her skin colors both said see you soon instead of goodbye. Alex returned to his quarters, filed transfer paperwork before he could second-guess himself, and tried to believe that somehow this impossible connection they'd built in silence could survive translation into words and worlds. The Sithari delegation departed on schedule, ceremonial and formal, Princess Kalenti regal and distant at the center of her entourage. Alex stood in formation with security detail, watched her ship detach from Meridian Station, and felt the loss like something physical had been removed from his chest. But mixed with the loss was hope, because she'd looked at him once during departure, brief, quick, but her skin had flickered with colors he'd learned meant promise and determination. 3 weeks later, Alex received official notification that his transfer application for cultural liaison posting to Sithari space had been approved with unusual speed. His commanding officer looked somewhere between baffled and concerned when delivering the news. This is highly irregular, Rivera. Your application was not only approved but expedited through channels that normally take months. Someone with significant influence wants you on Sithari homeworld specifically. Yes, sir, Alex said, not elaborating. Would that someone be Princess Kalenti, who specifically requested you in her formal filing for ongoing cultural exchange coordination? Possibly, sir. You're falling for an alien princess who you're not supposed to talk to, aren't you? Not supposed to talk to her first, sir. She can initiate conversation, which she did, extensively on the night before she left. The commander gave him a long look. You're either very brave or very stupid, Lieutenant. I'm choosing to interpret it as brave, sir. The journey to Sithari space took 2 weeks. Alex spent them studying their culture in depth, improving his grasp of their language beyond the basics, trying not to obsess about whether he'd made a completely insane decision based on feelings for someone he'd spent most of his time with in silence. The Sithari homeworld was beautiful in ways that made Earth look unfinished. Crystalline cities that grew from the ground in organic patterns, structures that shifted colors with light and time, architecture that seemed more grown than built. Alex was assigned quarters in a section of the royal complex designated for honored exchange personnel, given a schedule of cultural training and diplomatic responsibilities, and told the princess would contact him when her schedule permitted. He waited 3 days, attending briefings and learning protocols before she appeared. Alex was in one of the palace gardens, alien landscape that was breathtaking and slightly unsettling in its perfection, when Princess Kalenthi simply walked up to him, alone and without the attendants who typically surrounded her everywhere. "Hello, Alex," she said in English, and her skin was brilliant warm golds. "Your Highness," he responded automatically, following protocol. "Kalen," she corrected firmly. "When we are alone, I am Kalen, you came." "You asked?" "I asked because I could not simply let you disappear from my life. Because the silence we shared and the conversation that broke it felt more real than anything I experience in my duties. Because I wanted to see if what existed between us could become something more given time and opportunity." She moved closer, and her skin shifted through colors that clearly meant pleasure and relief and something deeper. "But I did not know if you would truly accept the posting, if you would truly choose to come to my world where you will always be outsider and minority." "I'm here," Alex said simply, "for 6 months officially. Unofficially, because I care about you and wanted to see if we could build something real beyond the silence and stolen hours." "Then let us build it," Kalen said, and took his hand. First time they'd actually touched, her skin cool against his warmth but not uncomfortable. Intentionally, with time and words and choice, rather than losing it to duty and distance. Over the following months, they did exactly that. Kalen taught him Sithari culture beyond diplomatic protocols, showed him her world's beauty and complexity, introduced him to the person beneath the princess. Alex shared human perspectives, helped her understand his people beyond formal treaties, showed her what genuine partnership could look like across species barriers. They fell in love slowly, deliberately, building something real from the foundation their silence had created. It wasn't simple. There were cultural barriers, political complications, people on both sides who disapproved of cross-species attraction. But they were both committed to navigating it together. When Alex's 6-month assignment approached its end, Kalen asked him to stay. Not as temporary liaison, but as permanent cultural attaché to her household, which was both official position and personal arrangement, giving him reason to remain on her world indefinitely. He accepted without hesitation. Years later, sitting together in the same garden where they'd reunited, Kalen said softly, "Do you remember when we could not speak to each other? When silence was everything we had?" "I remember," Alex said, his Sithari now fluent enough for easy conversation. "That silence taught us to see each other," Kalen reflected, her skin shifting through contented ambers. "Your presence said you saw me as person. My choice to sit beside you said I wanted to be seen. We built entire connection without words because words were forbidden. And that foundation made everything else possible." "They warned me not to talk to you," Alex said with a smile. "And you obeyed, right up until the moment I needed you to speak, when protocol mattered less than my distress. That is when I knew you were worth choosing. You valued my well-being over regulations. Best rule I ever broke. Best rebellion I ever committed, sitting beside you in defiance of everything that said we should remain distant." Kalen leaned against him, and even after years together it still felt electric, human and Sithari, warmth and coolness finding balance. "I love you, Alex. I loved you in silence, loved you in words, love you now in this life we have built together. I love you too, Kalen. My princess who defied protocol to sit beside a guard she couldn't speak to." "You're Kalen," she corrected. "Not princess, just Kalen who found the human who saw her." They sat together in the alien garden, proof that connection transcends protocol, that silence can build foundations as strong as words, that sometimes the most forbidden attractions become the most profound relationships. Alex had been warned not to talk to her. She had defied protocol to sit beside him. Together, they built something beautiful from silence and choice, from forbidden moments and brave decisions, from the careful space between what duty demanded and what their hearts chose. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Sometimes the most powerful rebellion is simply sitting beside someone. Sometimes love begins in the loaded quiet between two people who aren't allowed to speak, but choose each other anyway. And sometimes the best conversations are the ones that never needed words